Ah, yes, friends. On a Wednesday, it's OGP, one giant podcast coming to you live consistently with regularity on YouTube, where I'm Adam Marbrecht, and over there I'm joined by the ever healthy, wealthy, and wise Mr. Andrew Makowitz.
Adam, it's going to be 84 degrees in the Meadowlands right by Giant Stadium today. Perfect time for me to go out and hit the links to calm the nerves before tomorrow night, which is your Super Bowl, your Christmas or Kwanzaa. We're about 36 hours away from knowing who the Giants will be taking at 11 or somewhere in the first round.
That is correct, sir, because as we know, and we come in off of our Wednesday show, where I'll just quickly say, things got off the rails in a hurry there. I'm not disgusted by the draft that I put out, but I think that the delicate balance of running something live and feeling like, well, I don't remember this being a part of the plan when I walked in the door. So as we work through today's mock draft that we're going to be doing, basically from the perspective of the Giants, right? Let's say that's Dave Gettleman sitting across from me, and I represent the young, vibrant, energetic Joe Judge. But you mentioned they're heating up at just the right time, friends. As the draft approaches, things start to get a little bit spicy. Before we dive in, same type of format that we did on Monday for our individual ideas around the draft, but we're going to take this a little bit bigger picture here, a little bit broader. We're not going to necessarily be held to the draft board. We want to give you a sense of where the Giants could go, where we think their mentality is going to be, especially in the first round, and then really the second and third as well. These key areas where we really think the Giants are going to address all the big needs, or they're going to have some issues. Before we do, though, there is some big news around the top of the draft that involves the Atlanta Falcons. There's been speculation around what they want to do at the number 4 spot, and now you're hearing that they would be willing to, are interested in fielding offers potentially on one 32-year-old high caliber talent, Julio Jones. What's your stance on the Julio?
Yeah, so I think this makes a ton of sense for the Atlanta Falcons. I think people have a problem with when you say you're trading a really good player. People are like, why would you do that? And the Patriots have always been great about trading people away a year or two before that you really start seeing a decline, and they recoup a bunch of assets. Now, one of the interesting things that people keep talking about is that if Julio Jones gets traded after June 1st, his $23.5 million cap hit, $15 million of that comes off the books for this year.
Yep.
So it's a crazy number, and people are saying so nothing will really happen with Julio on draft night because you got to wait till June 1st. Nothing will be official. And Adam, I'm not understanding why people are saying this. It makes zero sense from the Falcons' perspective to push $15 million of Julio Jones's cap hit into the next year. Remember, the Atlanta Falcons are basically starting over, right? They hired a new GM in Terry Fontenot, right? He got hired in January. Why is he going to continue to punt other people's mistakes and kick the can down the road when he could just trade Julio Jones on draft night and say, look, I traded him. We're taking a $23 million hit. Next year, when we have cap space and we're going to be a better team, we're going to be able to compete more. And guess what? That draft pick that I got will now be able to, be leveraged next season when we have cap space to sign other people.
Oh, 100%. I think it makes all the sense in the world. I don't think, though, that the Atlanta Falcons are starting over, though. I think what the Atlanta Falcons are doing is, remember, they have Calvin Ridley. I think that they still believe that Matt Ryan has a few good years left in the tank, but that Julio Jones at 32 years old is far closer to the end than the beginning. And there's been behind the scenes, right? He pushed to become among the highest paid wide receivers a couple of years ago. That's where you ended up with this big cap number coming into this upcoming season. So I think they look at it as, remember, Kyle Pitts has been attached to them there at the 4th spot overall. If we can move off of Julio Jones, or at least have the premise, right? We know we're going to move him in the offseason, save it at a more reduced cap hit. And then we'll go ahead and replace him with a talented player like a Kyle Pitts. You still have Calvin Ridley. You still have a dynamic offense, right? So I think that the Atlanta Falcons are still going to look to be competitive here, because I don't think what you're going to see is them go, say, quarterback at the 4th overall and really look to move the needle here, right? Because otherwise, different from Julio Jones, you would have moved Matt Ryan. He would have been gone already. You would have already moved off of him and established you're going for the young quarterback.
But the problem, Adam, just for the Falcons, and I know this is a Giants podcast, not a Go Dirty Bird podcast, but
But a draft
they,
podcast, though.
but they, Julio Jones has a $24 million cap hit this year. Matt Ryan has a 40-something million cap hit. The two of them make $65 million in terms of the Falcons cap hit. They are hamstrung by all the decisions that the previous GM has made, where he just kept kicking the can down the road, and now all of a sudden he's gone, and now Fontenot has to clean up the mess. And so my whole thing is Julio Jones is still a great player. The idea of waiting till June 1st to move that $15 million to next season makes no sense. Just take the hit now, and you can just say,
you think they should just get rid of him now?
They should trade Julio Jones on draft night, try to get a second round pick from the Jacksonville Jaguars, who have the first pick in the second round, may I say. And all of a sudden Jacksonville has the number one mature wide receiver for Trevor Lawrence. The Atlanta Falcons take the $23 million hit, replace him with Kyle Pitts, and get a second round pick now to start building towards future seasons, because they're stuck with
to be fine. Yeah,
they're stuck with Matt Ryan for this year, absolutely, and then next year there's like a $26 million dead cap hit. So let this GM get rid of all the mistakes that were made previously. The idea that he's just going to move money and screw himself over when he can really make decisions doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, well, yeah. So that we won't debate the idea around how much money is worth to have on your books, how much dead cap money be worth it, and what would it free up for you now this season in the middle of the summer to maybe go out and make some other moves. But either way, I think we will see Julio Jones going somewhere sometime relatively soon, and some team, maybe the Jacksonville Jaguars, are going to get an incredible opportunity to bring in a high talented player that still has obviously big upside. I think the little thing you keep in the back of your mind is Julio Jones has been injured, obviously. Nagging small injuries with consistency, and you wonder about that as he gets to 32, 33. Okay, like we said, it's a Giants podcast. 7 minutes in, Andy. It's not what we want to do. 7 minutes in. We go ahead and kick this thing off, though. We did our Monday mock draft. We took a look at what we maybe would want to do. And like I said, ultimately what you're going to get from us before the draft kicks off tomorrow is a collection of players that we think will be good fits throughout the first, second, third, fourth round, maybe even some late round guys too. Names to keep your eyes on. We did, Carter Coughlin and Xavier McKinney. Those are two names that I gave you last year. Now, Xavier McKinney was an easy one to give, but I thought the Giants would get him if he fell. And then likewise with a Carter Coughlin. So there's some sleeper picks out there that we've been able to provide for you. We now come into this mock draft, though, saying there's Dave Gettleman. Look, you're even wearing I feel like that's a nice little kind of a Dave Gettleman type of vest you got on there for the YouTube viewer. And then you have Joe Judge, obviously, casual man of the people, casual, right? Ready to jump on a ball and get hosed down. We're going to jump into this draft here. And at the first overall pick, so we run these simulators. I think let's start here. My belief is that the Giants legitimately are looking at, I think, one of two positions at the top of the draft, first and foremost. It goes away from what maybe you and I philosophically think. And that is either wide receiver. You've heard the rumors. Joe Judge could very well love Devonta Smith, or an edge rusher / we'll throw linebacker because there's one clear name that stands out there at the 11th overall pick. As you get the ball rolling here and you come up on 11, just flesh out your thoughts around it and where you think, as Dave Gettleman, the Giants are going to go.
Yeah, so as Dave Gettleman, and that's the interesting thing about this, we had talked on our Monday show about what we want the Giants to do. If I'm Dave Gettleman and I'm sitting there at 11, I'm thinking to myself, okay, I drafted Andrew Thomas, number 4 overall last year. He showed some promise. Matt Pert, we mid-round pick, making sure that he gets up to speed. He's working hard in the offseason. I'm excited about that. We just got Nate Solder back on a lower cap deal. What good veteran swing tackle presence. I signed Zach Fulton as a stopgap at guard. I still have Shane Lemieux and Will Hernandez, who was a second-round pick. I'm feeling like my line is starting to come together, and they just need a little bit more time. And I don't want to really put too many assets towards the line. So I don't think Dave Gettleman is necessarily thinking that tackle makes the most sense, just based on where he's invested his money. And then secondly, Dave Gettleman's probably sitting there saying, people said we weren't explosive enough on the outside. I went out and got the best wide receiver on the entire market in Kenny Golladay. We needed more speed. I went out and I got John Ross. We needed some more pass catchers. I went out and got Kyle Rudolph. We have solidified this offense with Saquon Barkley coming back, a healthy Sterling Shepard and Evan Ingram, Darius Slayton on the outside. I have done what I need to do to make this offense sing. And so really, I think Gettleman is looking and saying, I think we still can improve on the defensive side of the ball. And so at the 11th pick, my belief is that if Micah Parsons is there, the Giants are going to take him. His versatility inside to play next to Blake Martinez is unbelievable. He's a guy that's all over the field. He can get outside and he can find ways to get to the quarterback no matter where you put him, in that linebacking position. And that's the type of toy that Patrick Graham would love to be able to deploy on that defense. The one knock is the off-field stuff with Parsons, and that's why I've removed him from my board on what I want the Giants to do. But when a talent like this comes along and you have Patrick Graham screaming, we don't have edge rush, we need linebacking help, what can you do for me, Joe Judge? This is the decision I think the Giants go with.
And it's interesting because there's no knock on it. We say the off the field stuff. If you feel comfortable with where he's at from a character standpoint for Parsons, then obviously he's an incredibly talented player. You go watch the tape. It's not just that, you say he's going to need to develop on the outside as far as his edge rushing technique, but you've seen him in the run support, in the blitzing from the linebacker spot on the inside, as the Giants would have him in the 3-4. He's a hell of a player, right? I mean, there's no two ways to slice it. And I think you mentioned a couple of good things there, which is what Dave Gettleman accomplished in the offseason and how he perceives it, right? If I'm saying from Joe Judge's mindset, though, one of the pieces you mentioned on the Austin side, but defensively, Adoree Jackson, right? So you've gone out and you've made yourself better and, significantly better at the cornerback spot. The other rumor that we have heard is, what if a Surtain falls there, right? What if Surtain is available at 11? Would that push the Giants? And a conversation that I did start to have, and maybe that Patrick Graham would be having with Joe Judge and with Dave Gettleman, would be, hey, I know that we're paying $13 million a year to Adoree Jackson, but if I told you that we can draft the future stud outside corner for our team, that in 2 years from now, when Bradbury and Adoree Jackson might be off the books, we're going to be ready to roll right over and get our next big wave on the outside, an area where, by the way, up until Bradbury, we were just throwing stuff at the wall, right? Janoris Jenkins was the last guy that had any real stability for us, and everything else has just been hit or miss. And we know the struggles going back to Gettleman and coming up to get a guy like DeAndre Baker. So I do wonder if that would play a factor here, if a guy like Patrick Surtain were available. The other pieces that you talk about are the wide receiver. And the question really becomes, too, in Joe Judge's mind, am I building for just right now, this moment, or for the big picture? And how do I feel about a player like Sterling Shepard? And even if I love Sterling Shepard, is he going to be here long term? Is Darius Slayton a fifth-round gem that we got really excited about? What is his ceiling? Because you can make the case that we're only 1 year away from the Giants having Kenny Golladay and some other things, right? We may be only a year away from Evan Ingram moving on in free agency. So it creates a real concern, I think, if I'm maybe Joe Judge, saying, I want to make sure that I have bullets in the chamber down the road here to make sure that we're still going to be high-powered, and not just this year, but 2 and 3 years down the road. So you went with Micah Parsons. I think it makes a lot of sense. For me right now, I look at the draft board. Parsons is there. I'm going to say that the character piece plays a big factor. If not in Dave Gettleman's mind, who was willing to come up for a guy like DeAndre Baker, who had, as we had talked about, right, red flags potentially. Joe Judge, is not down with it. He's not down with the character flaws. So Parsons is there. If we agree that offensive line, at least at this point of the draft, is not as big a concern for the Giants as maybe it was for us, Surtain is available. I'm not going to take him here because I think you have the logic of saying, hey, if you've already accomplished what you did in the offseason, it has to have some weight for you, has to have some impact. But there is a team that I think would love to come up and get him, and that's the Arizona Cardinals here. So if I don't believe that the character flaws potentially around Parsons, the Arizona Cardinals, who would be desperate for a cornerback, who are in win-now mode, they go ahead and offer me the 16th and 49th pick. I pull that trigger, and I move myself down a little bit into the draft. And then when I come back up at 16, guess what? I've got everything I could want there. Christian Darrisaw, if I want to go that route. Rashad Bateman is on the line there. Or I could even go into the edge rushing class. Now it's about value for me, and I want to make sure we start to move into the second round here. But now it's about value for me and what I can accomplish over this round, and then I have to think ahead to the second round and what I'm going to get there. in that regard, I think, again, now I'm the Giants here now. Vera Tucker's available. Personally, that excites me. I've traded down, and I could also go get a guy like Vera Tucker and plug that
That would
hole.
feel pretty good at that moment.
And by the way, thank you for saying something there, because I feel like for a stretch here, I basically turned this into a solo podcast rant. So after the trade down and it's 16, as Dave Gettleman, as Joe Judge, I look at it and I say, Kwity Paye is there. He's an edge rushing talent, 16th pick overall. I don't want to risk anything happening behind me here. As we've seen, guys like Osai are starting to move up some draft boards. We don't know what's going to be available at that second round. And even though I made a trade down and I could start to dance around the board, again, it always takes a partner to get those things done, right? So I get the edge rusher, I address that need, and I move myself into the second round.
Yeah, I said it from the beginning that I thought Kwity Paye was the best edge rusher in this draft, more than Ojulari and others. I like the
pick. Giant guy, right?
Yeah, he does. He does feel like a giant guy, because he is and he can get to he can get to the quarterback. His strength is off the charts. I would be very happy if the Giants were to be able to address the edge rushing position early and also accumulate more picks to be able to move around the board, the chessboard, so to speak. And so, Adam, I'm all for that type of move. I'd be happy if the Giants went that way.
Yeah, I think it works for them, and it addresses, again, one of the two big needs. And we talk about so now we talk about the board in the second round. We've both gone with defensive playmakers, and theoretically, Parsons will be a contributor off that edge as he goes forward in his career. So now second round comes up. Now I'm going to do a little bit of work here in the background to move up from a position in the draft and try to simplify things a little bit. But you come up at 42. Where does your mind go now as Dave Gettleman looking to build out this roster? You said, hey, I did the offensive line work. And by the way, there is this perspective around the NFL that if you think you have 3 solid linemen, all you need is 2 guys to fill in around them, right? And I wonder if the Giants right now maybe do feel that way, where they're saying, hey, if I believe in Thomas, Gates, and Pert, that's 3 out of 5, baby. So I don't necessarily need to reach for any of these talents. But are you influenced by what you're seeing on the board at 42?
Yeah, so when I think about what's available around the 42nd pick, there's 2 places that really come to mind, me as Dave Gettleman. I've talked about how I've addressed the offensive line. I talked about how I've addressed wide receiver. But also, when we think about what the needs are now, Micah Parsons has kind of solidified the linebacking portion of things. He gives us a little bit of pass rushing. I feel like I've done pretty good, on this defense. You look at our secondary; it looks great. We've brought back Leonard Williams, so our defensive front looks good. I feel like we have the right pieces there. Now, I know you can never have too many pass rushers, and guys like Perkins are sitting there, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Giants even doubled down on a situation like that. Mm-hmm. But really, I think Dave Gettleman can go back and say, okay, if we do look at the offensive line, maybe it's not tackle that I'm really interested in. Maybe it is the guard position that is more important. I didn't waste another first-round pick on an offensive tackle or an interior lineman. I was able to get to our defense some pass rushing help and some linebacking help. So you look at Zach Fulton. He's kind of a journeyman. He's been around, bounced around a little bit. The Giants only gave him, I believe, a 1-year deal. You have Will Hernandez that's coming up towards the end of his contract. He might even be released.
Right? Zach Fulton is a poor man's Cam Fleming. You know what I mean? Just to give some perspective here, right? That's right. Not what you want.
And the only other guard we really think about is Shane Lemieux, who was a 5th-round pick. So I could see a scenario where the Giants are planning for now and the future, where you look at someone like Wyatt Davis, guard. He's big, strong out of Ohio State. His pass blocking metrics, according to everyone, is off the charts. You watch him; he was great. He was hobbled by some injuries, which is a concern for an offensive lineman. But man, you bring him into that room and you have him compete. He could be a starting guard week 1 for the Giants. And if you're Dave Gettleman, you're saying, I really like Pert. I really like Thomas. I drafted them both. I have Solder as my swing tackle. I inherited, all this different stuff. I tried to cobble together my guard positions, putting Wyatt Davis there along that offensive line. And he's basically crafted every single one of those positions with guys he's brought in.
Yep. No, I like that a lot. And listen, the injury concerns around Davis certainly are something that are going to permeate, throughout the draft. There's a lot of guys like this that get tagged with this. Dickerson is a guy who maybe would be going higher, and everyone's basically saying, yeah, first round talent, if not 4, right? And in some cases, you got guys that have had multiple ACL tears, or Ojulari. There's been some rumors that maybe he has some knee concerns, and I've heard a lot of fans say, "Oh, great, maybe he'll fall to us then in the second round." And I'm like, no, guy, I don't care when we take him. If he's got injury concerns, his injuries don't get less by what round you take him in. So I think there's a lot of boxes to check here. So to let you know what I ended up doing in the background. So I'm going to stay at 42 and 49, but I've cleared up another area because I'm going to go ahead and try to really attack this draft. And let me be clear too about the idea of trading down. I think this would be the Joe Judge push for me, right? The New England Patriots in him that says, hey, you got to be willing to move around the board. You got to be willing to take what's there for you and try to create the best collection of talent. So in the background here, you can say I did this whenever in the course of the draft. I took 76 and 116, and I packaged that up with the Pittsburgh Steelers to get myself to 55. So now I'm 42, 49, and 55. Coming out of the first round, we went ahead and said, we like what we want to do here defensively. We know we need to get after the quarterback. We get Kwity Paye. Now it comes back to me as Joe Judge saying, but I told you, though, I was really in love with a player like Devonta Smith. Now, he wasn't there for us, but I do like the idea of getting a dynamic wide receiver and making sure we have the next big, great player to pair with Golladay in the short term and build around in the long term. So when I come up at 42, because I have a little bit of this flexibility, I'm going to go ahead and take a look down the board here at the wide receiver class, and I'm also going to take a look at the position that you drafted, linebacker, to see what might be available. Dyami Brown, North Carolina. I've said this before, so personally, I can see how it aligns for a selection here, but even for the Giants, if they're saying they want to add dynamic playmakers, this is a great spot to do it in, because after Dyami Brown, you start to get into third rounds, and some of those other names I've thrown out, like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tylan Wallace, those guys are going someplace a little bit ahead of it. So I think there's real value here. This is a guy that can do outside, inside work. I think that he would make a lot of sense. I pull the trigger on him at 42, and then I'll say, we'll line up my 55th with your 76th, Andy. And there at 49, this is where I look over at that defense and I say, I got my edge rusher, but who am I pairing for coverage purposes in the middle of the field alongside of Blake Martinez? And who am I thinking I can build around going forward? Jabril Cox out of LSU. Great opportunity to take a dynamic coverage, athletic sideline to sideline linebacker that basically directly in polar opposites complements what Blake Martinez is, right? Little stiffer, right, plays downhill, supports in the run game. So a real opportunity here for me to get Jabril Cox. And before I make that selection, as we've talked about just building these out around 42, let's say in general, these are the names that I think are worth keeping an eye on. You talk about taking an offensive lineman, taking a guard there, as you did with Wyatt Davis. Talk about maybe an inside linebacker, depending on what the first round is done. Jabril Cox does jump out. You mentioned Ronnie Perkins. I think, listen, he's got great grades as far as run and pass defense. You wonder about flexibility across the scheme, certainly. But these are the kind, Liam Etchenberg is maybe a name that jumps out to some people as well as far as being an option. There's been some talk now with his shorter arm size that he would be a candidate to kick into guard. But as we talked about last episode, right? Everybody's a candidate to kick inside. Like, hey, maybe you'll go inside. You go inside. Let's all go inside. So it's almost like they're getting caught up in the COVID-19 protocols. Let's just all go inside. Let's all go inside and we'll have a good time. So, but these are, I think, the collection of names that Giants fans should be familiar with there at the top of the second round. Because no matter what happens in the first, there is nice value pieces here. Maybe short of me saying a guy like Osai, right? If I hadn't gone Kwity Paye, maybe he's on my board. But he's been going early, even into the upper 40s now.
Yeah, and you look back to Monday, Joseph Osai is a guy that I saw that was on my board, and I was absolutely ecstatic to get him, especially because I went tackle first. So addressing the offensive line and then getting an edge rusher in the second round was huge. Now, I like that pick. The Dyami Brown pick is great. I think we both know that the Giants are going to take a wide receiver in this draft. If they don't, I'd be stunned. Yeah. And my whole thinking of this is if you take like a 5th or 6th or even like a 7th round flyer on a wide receiver, the chances of him making the roster aren't even that great just with the depth that we have. So if you're going to invest a pick in a wide receiver, make it count. Make it be a guy that is a top 10 wide receiver, top 15 wide receiver. So someone, as explosive as Dyami Brown is something I like. And that brings me to my third round pick, which has Josh Palmer on the board, which gets me very excited. But I already took him, and that's what, it's the Christina Aguilera, what a girl wants, what a girl needs. I want Josh Palmer. Dave Gettleman, on the other hand, says, you know what? I like those big-bodied, strong wide receivers. They're like hog mollies on the outside. They run people over. I'm really excited about those types of people.
I know where you're going.
And so in the third round, I believe, if available, the New York Giants will be selecting Nico Collins, wide receiver out of the University of Michigan. And this is the exact type of player you want. He has tremendous upside. He can potentially start in 4-set packages tomorrow. He has the ability to overtake Darius Slayton or Sterling Shepard moves on in a year and become one of those wide receivers in a 3 wide receiver set. This to me would be a home run hitting situation for Dave Gettleman if he walks away with Micah Parsons, Wyatt Davis at guard, and then hits on a wide receiver in the third round with tremendous upside at him.
And I love it, by the way. I think, he's been a guy that's fluctuated a little bit. He is going to need, they say, a little time to refine himself. And that's all right, because you have this talent ahead of him. And I think in both instances, Dyami Brown in the second round or even Nico Collins, the things that you'll probably want to start thinking about if you're Giants fans, and this isn't just because it's a personal piece, Evan Ingram becomes more and more disposable. Maybe not, in the short term, but you start to think about if it's Dyami Brown, okay, you're going to want to get some 4 wide receiver sets out there, right? You're going to want to start to get dynamic. Like there's a world where they start moving towards 11 personnel where the 2 tight end sets don't matter as much. And if you're only going to have 1 tight end, it's probably going to be a guy like Kyle Rudolph, who's known to be a solid blocker, hold up for the run game as things get spread out, get Saquon Barkley off on the edge, and still be serviceable in the pass catching game. So don't be surprised if one of these things works in tandem. As I come up on 76, and I will say, you can, I had 42 and 49 there. You can go ahead and encompass these any way you want. If you wanted me to put the Dave Gettleman spin on it, the Giants take Kwity Paye at 11, and they don't trade back at all. They want the edge rusher. That's who they desire. They're not worried about, he's 10 slots down on the draft board. Okay, that's fine. They take him there, and they only take a player like Dyami Brown, and they don't get the chance to get Cox. That'd be fine. But I made that move, and it allowed me to come up the board a little bit. And I can even still make the case that regardless of a trade down, I can package 76 and I can package 116. And that can allow me to get myself back into kind of a sweet spot here where, as I scroll down the list, I come across. So we looked at defense getting the edge rusher. We talked about another weapon. Let's get more dynamic for Daniel Jones in his pivotal third year. But then we do look back at the offensive line, just like you did earlier at that 42nd pick with Wyatt Davis. And you say, well, what's the long term here? What's going to happen with a player like Nick Gates? Is he definitely coming back? And 5th round pick Shane Lemieux, talented, but doesn't necessarily mean we're locked into him, just like Darius Slayton on the offensive side. That's where I see Creed Humphreys out of Oklahoma. This is a guy that is believed to be able to do everything on the inside, guard or center. And basically, you set it up so that you walk in the door and you say, hey, Creed Humphreys, if you win out at center, if we looks like you're just a natural stud there, which are all indications, hey, guess what, Gates? Kick on over. Give us a year at guard, because ultimately, as much as we've liked Gates, he may not be here again. This may not be second contract land for him. And if he plays well at right guard, maybe he will be back as our starting right guard now, right? So you start to flesh it out and solidify it. And I do think I can live in the world where offensive line does take a bit of a back seat. And I think it's realistic to say maybe we're going to end up, if you go weapons on defense and offense, if that's your value, that's your importance, you may have to push this back a little bit. And that's where moving up the board to make sure you get a guy like Creed Humphreys who can go anywhere from 50 to 65 kind of range. You're going to be just outside of that if you stay pat at 76. So I make that move up the board, sacrifice my 4th rounder, and I get myself a quality starting interior lineman.
I mean, you're working with the similar blueprint to me. You went Dyami Brown, then Creed Humphreys. I basically went Wyatt Davis, and then turned around and got Nico Collins. So we're thinking about where the value is in these rounds the same way. What I take away from all this, the more and more I do this, in taking a tackle in round one, because he does think that there are other areas that could dynamically change this team and the way they look, with an edge rusher, a linebacker like Micah Parsons, as I think the Giants will take, or even a wide receiver like Waddle or Smith if they end up falling. I could see him saying this makes more of an impact in round one. I could still get a guard or a center in the third, fourth, or fifth round that has the potential to start. Look at Shane Lemieux, right? So the more I'm seeing this, the more I don't think they're going to go with Rashawn Slater, which, is starting to make me think whether or not, taking a tackle that early again for the second time is the right thing. But I'm sticking with it. That's what I want. That's what I need. But here we are.
Yeah, listen, I think there's a lot of ways to finesse the board. So we round things out in the later rounds. I'm going to look at a tight end like John Bates. I'm going to look at a tackle like Robert Jones. I've done that a lot of times, and I think that would make sense for the Giants as well to build and prepare for the absence of Evan Ingram next year, and to have a backup swing tackle once Nate Solder is gone from this roster. But other guys, I think, to think about there, and you could, I know you still have your 4th round pick if you want to throw it out there. There are a handful of guys that I started to look at, specifically when you talk about balancing it, right? So if I'm Joe Judge and I really do love Devonta Smith and he's there for me, now I don't know what's going to happen at the edge rush class there at the top of the 2nd round. There are players like Patrick Johnson out of Tulane. He went 69th in this draft to the Bengals. I think he's a really good guy to consider. 255 is going to be able to play up that edge rusher. We've mentioned Cameron Sample before, also from Tulane. And then there's even another player that I want to make sure Odenigbo, I believe, out of Vanderbilt. I think that's how you pronounce his last name. Another edge rusher, has some injury concerns. But these are guys into that 3rd and 4th round that I think, depending on how the first 2 went, you might just fire. So in your case, right, say it ended up being the combination where it was you take Parsons and then you take Wyatt Davis. Well, you still may want to have an edge rusher, right? 3rd and 4th round, you can fire a couple shots at that position and say, no, is he a Kwity Paye talent? Obviously not. But can we manufacture it knowing that we have talent like Leonard Williams and like Dexter Lawrence? I think you create the collective, right?
Yeah, and that's the one name that I think I want to make sure that everyone highlights is Patrick Jones, the edge rusher out of the University of Pittsburgh. Now, the one knock on him, he's been falling down draft boards. They say that he fits perfectly in a 4-3 as opposed to a 3-4, where he can put his hand down in that technique and be able to get at the quarter. That this type of guy that has amazing power and speed and strength, we're going to be kind of an amorphous 3-4 defense with how we move our linebackers around anyway. Taking a late 4th, 5th, even 6th round, depending on how far he actually falls in this draft, I think that would be a great addition to the room and creates just another complement to Blake Martinez and Parsons or other people that we've drafted. So be on the lookout. Patrick Jones, I think, is a great pick. I wouldn't be surprised to see him creep into the 3rd round, but if he's there in the 4th or the 5th, I think that's the type of guy the Giants could take a flyer on, to your point, with edge rushers.
Andy Makowitz is going to get out the door here. I'm going to wrap things up tying into what he just mentioned there with a player like Jones and some other options. So it's a bit of fond farewell to Andy Makowitz. I'm just going to tie a bow on a couple of these things here. Obviously, draft is coming up tomorrow on Thursday. So if you're on YouTube, bye, Andy. Everyone wave goodbye. Listen, this guy's got work to do. He can't just sit around here all day long. So the only thing that I really want to just continue to flesh out here from that standpoint is because a guy like Cameron Sample or a guy like Odenigbo out of Vanderbilt, these are both going to be players that are big. They're 275, 280. The versatility piece on them. So when Andy says something like, well, these are some guys that might best be suited for 4-3 work. If in the case of a Cameron Sample specifically, because I've liked him for a while now, if you look at a player like that, he can go ahead and line himself up at edge, defensive tackle, and then so he can put his hand in the dirt in a 3 technique. He can stand up on the outside. He can rush on the interior. So the way I look at him is kind of, hey, Patrick Graham, you want to flip over to that 4-3 and go alignment and go ahead and give yourself a real opportunity to stuff the run up, right? And to get after the quarterback. Well, now you could be looking at Leonard Williams and Cameron Sample on the outside, move inside Dexter Lawrence, bring in player X, as we know, with the collection of guys that they're kind of looking at here in the depth chart room. And you kind of roll from there, right? So there is versatility. And we've seen these guys, if you go watch tape on them, they are quick. Like, they play lighter than 275, 280. They are in the vein of a Leonard Williams, though nobody has that kind of real freak combination of not just quickness for his size, but the length that Leonard Williams provides you is also what makes him so effective. So there are going to be options like that as the draft moves along. I worked my way through the back end of this simulation. And again, the trade down scenario, listen, we can debate about if the Giants will be willing to do it, but specifically because the Cardinals are there and because they're in win now mode and because they have an opportunity here to give themselves a good look at getting a quality player like Patrick Surtain to solidify what they're doing for their team, that makes it very enticing for me. So I'm just going to pull up my draft board here real quick, wrap it up, and get ourselves out the door. And what we end up coming away with is going to be Kwity Paye, Dyami Brown, Jabril Cox, Creed Humphreys, John Bates, and Robert Jones. Now, I can tell you with confidence that don't give me Jabril Cox. I'm still going to be happy that I got Kwity Paye, and that feels like I've added to the defensive room. You can tell me that it's cost me those picks to get up to go get Creed Humphreys to make sure I got an offensive lineman. That works fine for me as well. The back end thing. So we mentioned this there earlier about wide receiver and what that could look like for the Giants and how it could impact an Evan Ingram, maybe even a Darius Slayton. But I'll say it again. I think that if the Giants take a wide receiver early, second round, even third round, like Andy did with Nico Collins, I think the phone starts to ring, and I think you start to field offers on Evan Ingram. And if you can get a fourth round pick for him in this year's draft, or maybe even next year's draft, and maybe you elevate the value of that selection by pushing it back a year, I think that they would do that. I think you'd be happy to still have Kyle Rudolph, Caden Smith, and Toaloa. Then at the back end of the draft, if you can get a guy like John Bates, who's a solid blocker, also athletic enough to get out in the pass game, great. Bring him in, learn how to develop behind Kyle Rudolph for a year, and you can be the heir apparent at that position for us. So this is, again, how do you roll this thing over and create value throughout it? I think Andy did some really smart things here in taking a guy like Wyatt Davis, someone that we've shied away from because of injury, and maybe my board fell, closer to what I'm in. And from a Giants perspective, the John Bates, Robert Jones, right? Robert Jones, I can say the Giants, you should keep your eye on for him. John Bates, maybe that isn't going to be what they do. But it's come in somewhat close to alignment. And I just think positional value, that's what it really comes down to. And the first two picks in Kwity Paye and Dyami Brown, those are the ones that get the best draft grade overall for me. So listen, we work our way through it. We try to bring as much value out of this draft. And it will be interesting to see. What do the New York Football Giants feel at 11? The one wrinkle, we said they traded back there when they had the opportunity with the Arizona Cardinals. There is some level of thinking that the New York Football Giants could be there at 11 and Surtain could be there, and they would be legitimately considering it. And in that vein, because we didn't touch on it at the top, if that's the opportunity, then you have to think that even though you're paying big money to Adoree Jackson, if he becomes a high-level slot shutdown guy for you and you put Patrick Surtain on the outside, now you're talking about really shutting down the opposition in the passing game. And we know no corner, as good as any of them can be, are going to shut down a guy for more than 5 seconds or so. But think about how that impacts the ability of Leonard Williams, Dexter Lawrence, and the cast of guys that we have in the linebacking core, the Carter Coughlins of the world, if he gets a look, right? And then obviously we went into free agency, and when you bring in, you still have Carter Coughlin coming back from injury, but Reggie Ragland and Odiningbo, like these are all guys that are going to be able to come in here, and with the better protection on the back end, throw in all the safeties, Xavier McKinney, Logan Ryan, Jabril Peppers, right? You're going to get a real chance to get after the quarterback. So I think there is some world, however slight it may be, I can see that vision of it. And if that were to be the case, then I think you come back around and you say, at the position of 42, where I took a wide receiver, now you are probably sitting there and saying, well, how can I make sure that I get an edge rusher out of this class? If a Joseph Osai fell there, you'd feel really good about it. Is Ronnie Perkins a solid fit for you? Would you, by the way, a guy that we didn't really talk about today, and that's Joseph Tryon. I think that he might make a lot of sense there if you've brought in another weapon in the first round. You say, hey, is this guy going to need some time to develop? He certainly will, but we love what his upside is, and we love that we already have a very talented core defensively. So there is that world where you can bring along a more developmental talent in the second or third round and still feel really good about it. Tryon has been rising up boards a bit here, so I think 42 you might feel is a little bit early, but we're going to find out tomorrow night. Are these guys starting to inch up the board in that edge room class where I think the real value is probably somewhere in the range of 18, 19, 20 to 50, 55. And the only concern is, are you elevating the stock of a player because you want him to be that value as opposed to what his true value is? Big bonus for Tryon. He's young. So we will get ourselves out the door here. I'll take care of this on the back on the back end as I see Joseph Clark coming in, man. Yeah, you better believe it. We are trying, man. We are scraping our way towards finally getting this draft kicked off tomorrow night. I don't know if we're going to do, by the way, live coverage or not. Maybe Andy and I will hop onto some IG live. So if you're on Instagram, we haven't done a ton of upkeep over there, but if we're going to go live, there's some chance maybe we would do it on there just to pop in, talk about the draft pick as it's coming up at 11 for the Giants, and then get ourselves out the door as opposed to on YouTube. So keep that in mind for tomorrow. We'll certainly announce it. If you're not following us on Instagram and Twitter, do that at One Giant Podcast, and then you'll hear the shout out when we're going to go live. Friday morning, what's going to be really nice, by the way, is obviously we'll get the first round pick from the Giants. So then we can go ahead and reset that draft board and start to look about day 2 and say, now what do the Giants want to accomplish in rounds 2 and 3 based on what they did at the 11th overall pick? So that's going to be a really fun Friday show. I'm excited about that. Yeah. You know what's weird too? I will say, Joseph, it has been weird. I said this to my buddy. Everyone seems to be suffering draft fatigue. The prospects, what could be, all the scenarios. And I think the lack of the combine, that's what's really brutalized this to me, because the combine gives you another sample size on players that you start to debate and shift and move them. And even though it may seem incidental, just getting the footage, we all get to watch the combine on the NFL Network. You get to see Run Rich run as he does his 40 time and all that good stuff. When you don't have that, now everything just feels like, remember those talking points that we came out of the college season with? That's still what I'm massaging here. And I'm telling you that I went back and I watched tape and this is what I thought, right? And it just becomes somewhat cycling over this run here. So the lack of the true combine and having to go off of pro days, which were being dismissed by so many people, is saying, you can't trust the 40 times from pro days. It's okay, but it's controlled conditions. This is why you want them in that Indianapolis out there with the Colts, and saying Lucas Oil Stadium and saying, hey, like, you're in here. Everyone has the exact same playing field, and we're going to run you through all these reps, and you're going to be there together. And there is a little bit more of a heightened stage there. You don't have your hometown receivers. You don't have your home stadium from your college days. So you are thrust into a little bit more, pressure scenario where you feel like it's ratcheted up and all eyes are on you. So losing that seems to have diminished it. And it's just, it's been weird. I'll put it that way. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. It all matters to whatever degree. All these elements count for something. And maybe there is a world where you just wish they would do this and just shove that schedule, condense it down a little bit tighter. We could be having this draft at the start of April. What are we waiting all the way until the end of it? But that's when you find out things like maybe Ojulari has knee issues, or maybe a guy is rising up aboard because everyone keeps studying more tape on him. And I will leave you with this before I get out the door here and have to get into a very serious edit here for the podcast episode. Steve Young was talking about what's gone on and how players have been scouted. Why are quarterbacks specifically? Why are they rising so much? Why do you see so much movement? And maybe even a year like this. Remember, Zach Wilson, he kind of came out of nowhere to cement himself as the number 2 pick. And the one thing he mentioned was all of these rankings and how these players are viewed are primarily getting pushed through a college prism and through college, commentators, game day guys, right? And even then, Mel Kiper, and you start to get, his take on it, and they start to build those boards out. But as the pro teams start to turn their attention to the college players, they go back, they study every quarterback, every single throw, every single down, every single rep, every single play, to really get down to every bit of minutia on these prospects. And that's where you really start to say, go back even to Daniel Jones draft class, right? Dwayne Haskins. I think that the reason why coming off his year, 50 touchdowns, everyone's, here you go. You're going to have to go up to get this kid. The reason why he ends up being there for Washington in the middle of the first round is because as you get into more of his tape, you say, yeah, listen, at college, it's just bombing the ball out there. The coverage isn't going to be as good at that level. And the route running isn't going to be as crisp. And he doesn't have to be as accurate with his ball placement. Pro level guys are going to examine that, break it down, and say, is he worth a first round pick in terms of taking a look at the kid? Sure. And feeling like you could develop him into that? Yes. And then it comes down to character and attitude and all those other pieces that Dwayne Haskins suffered with as well and struggled with as well, certainly. And that's why he finds himself now in Pittsburgh trying to reboot, right? So these are the things that I do think shift, and it's reasonable to have that in your mind as we work towards the draft and realize this is why guys ebb and flow. This is why guys move up and down. So we will, as we say, be back in at least on Friday morning, breaking down what the Giants do tomorrow night and possibly even live. So be sure to check out us on social media. Follow the podcast wherever you get it. Leave a 5-star review if you're so inclined. It really does help us as we try to move up the boards and just continue to establish ourselves. We love doing the work, and we hope that you guys are enjoying it as well. On social media also, just real quickly here, on Instagram, we're going to lay out, I said, what we did on Monday, what we did today, but basically a collection of names from Andy and myself, 2 to 3 in the first round, second round, third round, fourth round. You're going to end up with, 8, 9, 10 guys across those first 3, 4 rounds. The guys that we think, here's names to know, right? Here's names that we think could align with the Giants, could be nice value picks for them. And just like last season, we're trying to hang our hat. I went deep for Carter Coughlin last year. I'm going to try to live in that fourth round and maybe find that steal of the draft that the New York Football Giants and the fans can get excited about bringing in. That'll do it for us on another great episode of One Giant Podcast, excuse me. And as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and demand that let's go Big Blue.